Eraserhead is my most spiritual film.
Why elaborate on that?
No.
And I make films because I have not learned anything else.
Hello, viewers. This is the Emma of the Impact podcast, film podcast, to be sure, because that's what we're doing. I'm your Time Lord today, and I'm telling you that if you aren't living on the edge, you're taking up too much space. Today, we're talking about the film Mind Game, which we could tell you every plot point, and you're still not going to know. And my co-host today, who are you?
Hi, I'm James, everybody. I feel like most people call me movie good or movie bad.
I usually don't like to prod into someone's own introduction. This is a rarity. I need you to tell everyone what your Halloween costume was this year.
I dressed up as Brat Longlegs, if Longlegs had a Brat summer, due to my love of Longlegs, the film, and also Charlie XCX and Brat.
I've seen a lot of great costumes as a horror lover. That is one of my favorite conceptual costumes I've ever seen.
It was a really funny costume to come up with. I think I had the idea I want to say 2 months before Halloween. It was really hard to not tell anybody what exactly was going on.
Why did you pick this movie?
Why did I pick Mind Game? There's multiple reasons. Part of it is the practical reason. This Blu-ray's been sitting on my shelf for 2-3 years. I gotta finally watch it. I own about 2,000 movies, and I don't think I've seen, I want to say about 500 of them. It's a big problem. And the more artistic reason is I'm a really big fan of the director Masaaki Yuasa. And he's well respected in the anime world. He's not at the level of recognition of someone like a Hayao Miyazaki or Satoshi Kon. I'll say in the last 10 or so years, he's gotten a lot more acclaim than the previous 20 years. And I think he's deserved that acclaim this whole time. Probably most known for directing The Night is Short, Girl Walk On. I think Ride Your Wave is the name of the movie. 2 very humanistic movies with 2 very, I think, different approaches to animation that are very colorful, very fluid, very much about loving life in 2 very different ways. And I want to watch Mind Game because I think that's by far his most well-known movie, even though it's been, I think, one of his least accessible for a very long time. Mind Game is the 3rd movie that I've seen from him.
Mind Game was my first movie I've seen from him. As a film enthusiast, animation is one of my weaker points, and I think it's a weaker point in general from when people talk about film. You know what I like about you?
What is that, Emma?
You're one of the people that does really give appreciation to animation, but when it comes to a film like Mind Game, where it's a very expressive film through visuals, films like this, a lot of critics, some professional, some unprofessional, I'm not saying I could do better, they'll give you a lot of adjectives, even if they're crazy. It's like watching Mind Game will make you feel like the worm from Robert Kennedy's brain is drinking tequila inside your brain, which is funny, but you're somebody consistently that I've seen through your TikToks that you are able to say things like that, but you always bring it back to either how you felt about the film, which I think is a very important aspect, or what the film was trying to achieve. You've always put your descriptions into something concrete, and I think that's a huge gift.
I really appreciate that. I feel like for a movie like Mind Game, maybe it's a little bit harder. I'll say it's harder to do. Not that I don't have my opinions or thoughts, but it is certainly a movie in a lot of ways.
So since we've given a lot of descriptions about Mind Game being hard to talk about, I'm going to go a little bit deeper, boiled down to what happens in this movie. Nishi is 20 years old. He's our main protagonist. He's been in love with Miyoung forever. She says, I'm going to marry this guy. What do you think about it? Hard to tell if it's Nishi's impression that she wants him to step up. And that's the thing. There's not one truth or perspective in this movie. She could want him to step up or not. It doesn't matter. But we see different versions and possibilities in so many moments in this film. And that's the point. If you're trying to figure out every moment and what it's linked to, which when I did hear the director's commentary on some scenes on the disc that I have, it did make things clear that yes, you can link very specific things, but I think this is a movie meant to wash over you. He doesn't stand up for himself. He says, that's great. You're going to marry this guy. They go to the restaurant where Mion's sister, so that's our primary characters, the sisters, Mion and Yen and Nishi, and they're just having a good old time. And then two yakuza just come into the bar unexpectedly looking for the owner. And one guy, he's wearing, is it a soccer uniform?
I think it's a soccer uniform off the top of my head.
He's huge. He's reckless. He's the muscle that's there. He's the one that ends up killing Nishi, who hides and doesn't stand up for anybody. He does it in a way that I think this film was trying to say the most, and I don't agree with this, the way it's said, not masculine way to die. He's shot through the anus, and we see the shadow of the gun. There's a lot of phallic symbolism in this film. We see the shadow of the gun coming towards him, huddled. He dies. He meets God, and there are two tunnels. One to go, you're done. You do not exist anymore. But he runs his first more active thing. He's always been a passive person, going back to relive life. He goes back to that moment when the big Yakuza guy is going to shoot him, and he fights for his life. Running away from the Yakuza, they go off a bridge, and then they're in a whale for most of the movie. Do you feel like that describes the movie? But how would you start with this?
I think that's the only way to describe the movie. I think you could, not saying this is the best way to like ever interpret a movie. Like I know people who read Wikipedia entries and oh, I know everything about a movie, and that's never the case. I think that's on paper everything that mostly happens in this movie. I would say for the most part. I think that speaks to why you can't really spoil the experience of watching the movie because that doesn't capture any of the things happening visually.
You're more the animation expert, so you're going to help me. But one thing
Mm.
I noticed is in only a couple scenes, and it's in the beginning and in the end, and then in this brief scene. I think it's supposed to be more real world moments, but that's my interpretation of it.
Mm.
When they use rotoscope, and that is originally invented by the Fleischer brothers when they were drawing over women dancing for Betty Boop, and they used Cab Calloway that embodied every note when he sang to draw so many characters. It looks like you're actually looking like a person, and the director wanted to originally direct the beginning of the film in live action. They all really realized that takes you out of it too much. So that's why they started use the rotoscope method. There's a lot of different types of animation that appear, some things that turn into paintings that we haven't seen, that probably is supposed to invoke a feeling more so than what the film's about.
Yeah, totally. It's wild all the things done animation-wise. Like you said, the rotoscoping, the parts that feel like paintings, the parts where everything is like super expressionistic, where you just see these hyper detailed looks on people's faces. Or I think this happens in the bar too, where there's like a hyper detailed look at the beer can or something going on in the scene. There's so much that's there that I don't think it's meant to trick the audience, but really it makes it, I don't want to say hard to take in, but there's just such an overwhelming amount of detail and such a creative way of using animation as a medium here. Like, I don't think many films are willing to do that. For anybody who hasn't seen the film and is listening to this, there's no other movie like Mind Game. This is a purely unique experience. Talking about the animation, something that you mentioned before that I thought was so fascinating was this idea of the camera before we were recording the podcast. But one of the coolest things to me, I don't know why this stuck out to me so much in the bar scene, was when they were or I was gonna say when they were filming, but the animation style takes on like a fisheye lens kind of detail where all of a sudden everything is warped and inverted. I'm like, this is such a fascinating way to look at this very mundane scene happening with all these characters.
It's
I don't
very
want to say it's
creative with the space. Some animations, even if they have a good story, they're acting like there's a camera there. Mind Game knows there's no camera, there's no laws.
for sure. Yeah. Yeah, whether it's the way that the animation looks or how it cuts, because there's such unique cuts in the edit too, just where things are just cutting all over the place to these different perspectives. And maybe that speaks to even this point that you're mentioning about how what is happening is what we're watching, the interpretation of the main character or someone else in the scene, or is it a dream? Is it reality? Or I don't know. There's such an openness with so much happening in the movie.
The basic message of this film is very simple. It's don't live a passive life. Take chances. Sometimes you'll be stuck in situations and they won't work out, but make the best of them. It's a wonderful mind game. Enjoy and be a participant of life. There's so many people you could be. And there's so many possibilities, whether they seem in which there's very specific visuals that show you this, which I don't want to spoil everyone, which I couldn't. I was lucky that I knew nothing about this movie. Nothing. And I think that's the best way to enjoy it if you can. And if
Yeah.
you're listening to it now, it's too late.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. I think that is the best way to interpret it. I knew who the director was. I knew of the movie by name, and I think by chance I saw the trailer for the first time 2 months ago because the movie was playing in theaters by me at the local independent theater,
I love big
and
theater.
I was spoiled for what the movie was. I'm like, "What the hell am like, what is this?" It was so different than what I was anticipating. If you can go in as cold or as blind as you can into the movie, please do.
There's so much going on. We'd have to put a big still of each moment and say, okay, this part means that and that. And but the movie doesn't want you to do that. When Nishi originally died from getting shot in the restaurant and he meets God, I think God is describing themselves the way we should treat this movie. Like, you can't
Mm.
really visualize me, or it doesn't matter what you call me. It's like that idea. I don't think that's intentional, but that's how I feel about this movie. Don't think too hard about it. Feel about it first. There are things you can link together later if you want to. What did you think of God?
I thought the interpretation of God was I have to agree. I didn't think about that interpretation before you said it about interpreting God in the same way that you interpret the movie, but I think that's so true because there's such an without spoiling who God is, I don't know, there's just such an openness and willingness to accept Nishi for who he is, right? Like the fact that he does have a choice about going whichever direction. Nishi decides, you know what, I'm gonna go back. I'm gonna fix this. I'm gonna change things.
And then God said, I'm rooting for you. You know,
Yeah, yeah. I- It was a completely different piece of dialogue than I was expecting. I think in most other movies, you might have some kind of plot where God is chasing after this guy or trying to change things or trying to refix fate back into what originally happened, but there's a complete acceptance of, no, I'm going to let you do this. This is so bold. This is so cool. Do this and be you. And I think that just speaks to, I think, the ethos of the entire movie too, and this idea of the second chance.
there's a reoccurring thing where we see text on a cell phone in the very beginning of the film, and then one of the parts at the end. In the beginning of the film, it says, your life is the result of your own decisions. Before Mion and Nishi have the conversation about her getting married, she's running from the big muscled Yakuza, and she gets her ankle caught in the doorway, but then she's fine. Then at the end, the cell phone says something different, because at the end of the film, it shows us a lot of different possibilities that could have happened to these characters after re-entering the world. And one of them is, which is part of a bigger point that I really like about this film that could just be the way I see it, is we do see the cell phone again, and then it says the story has never gotten to the, and it doesn't finish, end. In the beginning scene, when they steal the tall dark glasses Yakuza's car, which is very flashy, and they get in this high speed chase. And part of this high speed chase is one of the guys that's on top of another car trying to get to them, very 70s exploitation film feeling. He falls off of the car, and they show us that Nishi, driving the car with the girls, is going 120 miles per hour. And the guy is able to run 120 miles per hour. And he even notices, he's like, wow. So that kind of gives us that. We're not saying something supernatural, but we're not necessarily experiencing the world the way the world is.
No, I definitely agree with that. I completely miss the speedometer going to 120 miles per hour. I think that speaks to this idea that not saying that literally somebody could run 120 miles per hour, but this idea that there are choices and there's things that we can do and we can push ourselves to beyond these limits that I think that we believe that we have. And yeah, also to your point that there's a sense of fantasy to everything that's happening, whether you view it as magical realism or a dream or
I think it's a lot about how we perceive the film, but also how you can perceive yourself in your own life. But then when they are in the whale, which is the primary part of the movie, we meet an older hermit named Gramps who's been stuck in this whale for 30 years. and they have a grand old time with Gramps. He's a trustworthy guy. He becomes part of the main character gang. Then they run into a depression, which, like the idea that they're stuck in this whale, there's nothing they can do about it. You can get stuck in certain parts of life. And it's about trying to turn it all around. And I think that's where the most interesting animation happens after that.
Yeah, no, I agree. There's a moment. You're right. The primary bits in the whale make up the majority of the film. There is one bit of animation. And I don't want to talk about the specifics of what's happening in the scene, but it is the most creative type of scene that is playing out. Do you know the one I'm talking about between
The
Nishi and Mion? The
just
very
oh, just
the
between
abs
those two.
yes.
Yes, I do know what you mean. It's only done in that part of the film.
This very unique approach to the animation. I'll just say broadly, that kind of scene I've never seen done in a movie before in that kind
Nor
of
have
way, which
I.
was just wild. Yeah.
There's a lot of things that you will see and experience in this film you haven't seen, and especially in one film together. Mind Game really is its own experience. There are things about Mind Game that I felt. I'm not politically correct police. I hate the police. It's just more so that this film is told a little bit through the male gaze. It's noticeable. It's mostly the character, because there's not many characters in this film, of Mion, because she's very skinny and has large breasts. Even
Mm.
the dress she wears is all pink except it's white where her breasts are. Whenever the dress is cut, we see them bouncing. I'm not saying it is noticeable, and there are other scenes that are more of a scary situation when it comes to her that feel uncomfortable. It's supposed to feel uncomfortable. But I also think that my favorite character, who we've hardly talked about, is the other sister, Yang, who's the older sister. That's the one that's taking care of things, we get the sense of, because mom left. And Yan is very much an artist. And in part of the film, she cuts off her hair. And so that's something that is very commonly used all around the world with female characters. And in Maury Murdoch, who is a student of Joseph Campbell, who he does the important work of the hero's journey, but I do caution you, if you do go into his work, he was a very staunch anti-Semite, even though his work is very much referenced. Just so you know, if you engage with the work, keep that in mind. Maureen Murdoch asked Joseph Campbell, she said, what about the heroine's journey? And he's like, that's the end of the journey, is to get to the woman. She wrote her own book in response, and it's the same Jungian type of archetype. And the first, because it's like a cycle. For the hero, he gets the call to action. And for the woman, what is considered from the book and from the action of cutting the hair at some points as separation from the feminine. When we think of gender more today, because if I saw this earlier, I would think of it that way too. But now I think short hair doesn't mean anything about gender, especially with Jan being a very creative character. We don't know anything about her sexuality at all. That's never alluded to in any way that I saw. And it's not important. Some people have mentioned that she's supposed to be opposite to Miyang because she has smaller breasts. Did you have any feelings about the male gaze or gender in this film?
Oh, for sure. Like jumping off some of your points, even like the moment where Nishi saves Mion, right? Like that whole dynamic of what's happening. I see this talked about online as like this stereotypical male fantasy of, oh, this woman I love is in danger and I'm going to save her life. He kills the Yakuza guy. They get in his car. They drive off. They get into this whale. Like it's this whole semi-absurdist kind of fantasy that he's living through it and trying to engage in so that he can finally get this woman by the end, right? Whatever's happening in the film, as real or not real or anywhere in between. I do think that the male gaze shapes all of it. Like I think also at a meta level too, just considering what is happening at animation in Japan at the time. There certainly
What was
were.
happening at the time?
I think representation of women, I'll say behind the canvas and in front of the canvas, has gotten a lot better in the past 20 years, or like now versus it was 20 years ago. There are very few female directors, and that's still the case now. That's not completely changed, but
As little as I know, I watched the
Mhm.
90s
Yeah.
Sailor Moon, which the
Yeah.
creator of Sailor Moon doesn't like that version because she felt, not because just because men wrote it. It was framed in a way, even though those characters are young girls and they're shown mostly appropriately as young girls. They're not too sexualized, but the stories aren't represented the way the creator intended. Like that kind of thing. And but I know what you're saying. I think everyone knows what you're saying. You don't even have to yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think also that can be applied to queerness and transness if you do want to interpret this character as a queer or trans character. And
And
when it
maybe
comes to
not.
like,
Who knows?
right,
Yeah, it could be either way.
yeah, there's such a broadness to all of it. And I think that regardless of those interpretations, I think historically what Japanese animation was like at the time, I don't think anybody wanted to touch any of that with a 20-foot pole. When I think about the queer representation at the time and also the trans representation, it was like very minimal. So it's very possible that there was some kind of interpretation, or it was, like you said, just cutting your hair short doesn't really mean anything. It's just like I could just like short hair.
I'm just attributing it to the idea that this happens in films a lot, and it doesn't mean the same thing in every film, but it is something very noticeable. Yeah, she could have just cut her hair. It doesn't mean anything about her gender or her sexuality. She just cut her hair. She's in a whale. If your hair is long, it's smelly, and it looks cute. Pixie cuts are adorable on people with the right face shape. I am not one of those people. I found that out the hard way. They made it such a moment of it. A lot of people now talk about the blue eyeshadow. I'm sure you've seen it. I think that's the new cutting of the hair thing, is the blue eyeshadow. There's nothing we can really say about The Whale that won't ruin some of the artistic experience. That's where some of the more wondrous animation happens. But they do find out the whale is dying and they have to escape the whale. And when they escape the whale, we do get an ending that is a plethora of possibilities and endings. I love ambiguous endings. I love movies that don't have an ending as long as it's a purpose. Like it's meant not to have an ending. There's a difference. I have to admit, the first time I watched this, I wanted to know more about what happens to them after the whale, even though the movie showed me all these things that could have happened to them after the whale. That is one of the scenes that if you do get the physical copy, which, we're both physical media lovers, right? You do get some of the commentary on some scenes with the director, and that's one of the ones you get a lot of commentary on, is the exiting of the whale, which I only know this because the director was saying it, because the visuals, like, you have to really sit and watch it to take your time and point out things from their childhood that either make them sink back, but then eventually emerge out of the whale. Do you think the whale represents something specific?
So I actually wrote down something about the whale. I purposely did not Google if anyone else has had this theory about the film. I wondered if the whale was some kind of, not an allegory, but some kind of take on the Pinocchio story, instead of an idea of a wooden doll getting an opportunity at life, just a boy, or I guess a young man, having another opportunity at like the same kind of story, but playing out in a very different kind of way. Obviously, a much more adult story. Pinocchio is built around this fantasy of a doll becoming a boy. I have a lot of feelings about Nishi as a character, both in how he's written and how he exists.
Tell me. This one.
It's really fascinating because I think, not to categorize him with other anime characters I think of, but it's very clear to me that I think he's a character that isn't written with disdain, but I think he's a character that is meant to not be necessarily likable in the
We're meant to
beginning.
pity him, not
Yeah,
sympathize. We're meant to pity him.
yeah, yeah. You just feel really bad for him. He is somebody who you're just like, why are you not doing this thing? Or why you just feel so bad, but you're right, not sympathetic for him. Then I feel like I had a complete 180 on the character as soon as he has this new lease on life and he's, I got to do all this. Not saying that those moments weren't fixated or shaped around the male gaze, but I think that he's a much more likable character once he realizes, oh, I can't stay in this very stagnant place in my life. I need to do something about this.
Absolutely.
I think anybody who watches this film is able to find themselves connect to him so much more after this point and be like, oh yeah, I feel that way, or I feel like I need to do this about this, right? There's so much that you can gain from sitting with this film and sitting with Nishi as a character and his transformation. I think that's why I bought into this Pinocchio story about what is the whale, because it's such an odd moment. And maybe it's because also the film is moving at 100 miles per hour before this point, then it hits a halt. Like all of a sudden, all these characters are stopped. they're in a single location and they have to reflect on everything and what happens next. They're also, like you said, the whale dies, so they're on a timetable where they have to decide, okay, we're going to go down if we don't do something. And I think that also speaks to the overall idea around the film of, hey, you need to do something, right? Like, we can't all just expect the world around us to change in the ways that we need it to just by being passive or not making the choices that we need. And sometimes we're unfortunately like on a timetable for that.
There's this character that we see throughout the film, Time Boy, and he has a belt that turns back time. And it's implied this is a character people knew from a very popular cartoon. And we see Gramps is wearing that time belt when he is flying out of the whale. And it zooms in on the clock. And then we're sent immediately back to the darkness of the Yakuza, the thin with the glasses. It's raining. It is a starch difference from the sunshine when Gramps was getting out of the whale. And he makes a decision to turn the car around to pick up a woman we see him thinking about at a subway station. And then when he turns that car around, the sun immediately shines. And we even see his keychain is the same as a jellyfish in a jar that has to do with Jan and Mayon's mother that shows out throughout the film, all that. That's really, and there's so many things like that that you can enjoy through watching through multiple viewings of this. He picks up the woman at the station, and some people interpret it that it was all a dream, which I don't think is wrong. That's not my interpretation. Even if the director tells me that was I'm like, not for me.
As we understand who these characters are and what are their motivations and what are they longing for, what do they want in this future, and it's all these things that have either happened, and at the end of the film where we have this other montage, it's all the things that could happen, and also some of the things that are, I think, either still happening or also get some parts of the flashback or the montage that we get at the end are very similar, if not exactly the same as they play out in the beginning. But like you said, there's so much more context added all of a sudden.
When the guy turns around his car, the
Yeah.
Yakuza, to pick up the woman at the station, but then we see Mion, that's when her ankle doesn't get caught in the train.
Yeah.
And the bigger Yakuza guy doesn't catch up with her. So who knows what happens after that.
Sometimes I feel like if we don't make those choices, we will die inside of that whale and just be like,
All
shit.
of us could have died in the whale, or
Yeah.
we'll have a chance. We'll have a chance, like it's lucky. We'll be caught in spaces that we can't control, but we got to get out of that whale. Whether it's depression or you have to have this job that you hate because life, things like that. I love your Pinocchio interpretation, and something that kind of, even though I think it's supposed to be not a big thing in the movie, I think it's just supposed to be fun. Nishi tells a couple stories inside the whale, and one of them, they're all animated like Time Boy, and they show up at, I can't remember what they call it. It's a strawberry thing place. There's a character there called Robin, who is Robin Nisha, one that originally wrote the manga, and he's drawn handsome and cool and with really beautiful women. And something he does say to the character that we think is Nisha anyway, because they look so different. It's a whole different animation. That's one of the funnest parts of this movie, is that everything looks so different, is that you don't be a clone, be your own man, is something which lends to the Pinocchio thing, I think. The creator who makes himself look really intentionally, I think that's part of the joke, like really good, when it just like freeze frames and he's like, hell yeah.
I definitely love the connection of that to the whole Pinocchio thing and like this idea of having this other opportunity. And I know we talked a little bit about the montage at the end. This is like such a weird detail to like fixate on, but I really want to talk about it, what was happening with Japanese and like just Japanese like film that I've noticed at the time as I've watched more and more animation. I'll say plus minus 5 or 10 years between like Y2K. I feel there's such a feeling of existentialism that's happening at the time around Y2K. Like, people thought the world was going to end, people thought the computers were going to take over. And it doesn't matter who I'm watching, whether I'm talking about Mind Game. I know some of this in watching some of Hayao Miyazaki's movies around the time, I think specifically Howl's Moving Castle, because they touch on similar things in certain ways, but I'll name that. But I think about like Satoshi Kon and Hideaki Anno, who made Neon Genesis. But there's like this feeling of existentialism. It's such a small moment in that montage, but there's like a flash of the news with like, the invasion of Baghdad, the invasion of Iraq. And I don't know why that image stuck out to me so much.
I don't even
because-
remember it because things go so fast in this movie. I don't remember that at
Yeah.
all.
It was like a snap and you miss it moment. And it stuck out to me so much because a lot of, not to jump to like another movie, a lot of Howl's Moving Castle is Hayao Miyazaki's response to Iraq and how he thought what was happening was awful and we shouldn't have invaded it. And I'm not really
And he
sure
was
about.
right. He
Oh
was
yeah,
right.
no, I agree too. And I think I don't know what Japanese involvement in all that is. I'm not too familiar with that. But there's a feeling of that too watching this. Not saying that everything that's happening in the film is comparable to what was happening in Iraq at the time, but this idea that we are all making these actions and some of them are really bad and some of them are really good. And we should really think about what we're doing to an extent before we do something. Like I was talking about this reflection in the whale. I don't know. I thought about that with that imagery of Iraq for some reason, thinking about the end of the film.
When they escaped the whale and there was this montage of different possibilities, what was your thinking on that?
I think first I was caught up in this realization, oh, this montage with all these different possibilities, this connects to everything that we saw in the beginning. So it made me think about how cyclical the nature of everything is, whether life or the choices we make or consequence and action or so on. This feels like such a weird kind of, considering what the ending of the film is, I think I had this like feeling of hopefulness. There's so much possibility, there's so much chance, there's so many things you can do, but there's also like this bittersweetness that kind of was sitting with me the entire time because it was all these kind of fleeting moments that like not all these things can happen. Some of these things won't happen at all. There are possibilities, there's choices, these characters all have autonomy and agency, but none of this
One is
may happen.
me on becoming an astronaut, which cool, but we know that's probably not going to be what happens.
For sure.
Her going and living on just a rice farm, that's something
Oh.
that could happen. So I'm not
Yeah.
saying she has a specific fate, but astronaut not so likely.
Obviously there's nothing wrong with being a rice farmer versus an astronaut, but it was, I don't know, it made me feel like how many of these things that happen or could happen are so fleeting. We do have to make a choice, and some of these things are not finite. We can make changes, we can change our career, so on, but other things are, and it just left me with this, I don't know. I sat reflecting for a very long time after watching the film the other
Because
day.
although there were a lot of possibilities, realistic and not, where they were happy just doing
Yeah.
something different. So it's not, yeah, your life could have been different, but as long as you're happy now. There was one that I only knew because these moments happen so quickly. I only know from the director's commentary on the disc that I own. Is he was mentioning how Yen becomes a really big famous artist for a point, and then at some point in the same reality has to go ask Mion for money because that's something that realistically happens. So it's the idea that not everything's perfect and it doesn't need to be. And you already answered the question I usually ask: how did this film make you feel? But I'm gonna ask you anyway. How did this film make you feel? Hopeful?
I think hopeful. I think it made me a bit sad. I think
Yeah,
it also made, which is such a weird, it's such a weird feeling considering how, you're right, how happy these characters truly are in all these different realities. Like for the most part, it seems mostly happy, but I do think that,
and it never ends. The story, as it
yeah,
says.
yeah, that's the part that also gave me hope. Like this story just keeps going and going, and I don't know, I kind of love that. I loved how bold the movie was, but I loved how bold especially the ending was.
Was there a character you felt especially, no, not necessarily your favorite character, but one that kind of really stood out for you personally?
Mm. That's like a hard question. I did love the old man. I did love Nishi after he dies. I do think that
I think some people just need to die before they're likable.
and I do think that I think there's a lot of interpretations for what happens in the film and how the film is framed. But I do love this progression that he has as this much more bold and adventurous character. I really admired that, even if I wouldn't have made the same choices, even if there's so many ways to break down what he did, but I did really love his later appearance in the film after he dies.
Gramps.
Isn't a character necessarily I relate to, but he's interesting as a character to me because he comes to terms with his homosexuality throughout this experience, and also in the different endings. One, he just anonymously dies. We see in a
Wow.
newspaper clipping. And another, he has a sushi bar with Nishi and they're happy. We also see him reflect, and this is in like more of the post, him thinking, even though it was not my fault, I feel terrible that my wife and my son, I left them. I didn't mean to. I got swallowed by a whale, but there's still like there's a somberness to that. And he was afraid of the outside world for so long. One scene we see him on a boat and there's all these modern mobile phones at the time attached to it. So I really thought the exploration of his character, not perfectly done in my opinion, I think it's a really important one.
For sure. For sure. I really appreciate, obviously, being on here and talking about Mind Game, because what a movie. Like, seriously,
What a movie.
Ah,
I really appreciate you coming on. So this has been the Emma the Impact film podcast, because Emma the Impact and we're talking about film. And this has been my guest.
James, movie good or movie bad.
And you can find all of James's links down below in my description. So please do that. YouTube, TikTok, you post every day. Definitely check out all of James's stuff. And thank you for spending time with us. And hopefully you've enjoyed hearing about Mind Game with us, or it inspires you to watch Mind Game. That's the point of the whole thing. So
Yeah.
you lovelies have a good ending.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Emma.
But before you pick this movie, my introduction to Obayashi was the film House, because I'm a horror gal through and through.
And I like that it's so fast paced, because it matches the story itself, like riding on motorcycles, wanting to be like the wind. The film feels so breezy.
The movie starts with him rubbing like the
Yeah.
engine, and it feels like it's his lover in a way. Gotta live in the moment and let go of the outcome of things, especially in romance. You gotta let go of the outcome and just enjoy what's in the now and not always worry about what's to come.
It's the sort of film that makes you go and think of those major first loves of yours and that sort of breathlessness that comes with that.